If you found this video, I'm very excited for you because you either bought the bare bones kit bow or you did a little bit of digging and found this video. So thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna add as much value as possible. I've been working on this video for 2 months now, and so I'm so excited for you to see it. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're gonna turn this bare bone stave into this bones bow, and I'm gonna show you step by step how to do the entire thing. I personally have built about 100 of these bows, and my company's built more. I've broken it down into 6 steps for you to build it, and I've tried to make this as simple as possible, and I've reduced the amount of tools we need as much as possible. I've also placed timestamps in this video really in detail, so you can go to specific timestamps if you're referencing this in the future. It comes with the bow pre-glued up, tip overlays glued on as well. It comes with a string for layout, a straight edge for layout, and a silver Sharpie. And the last thing included in the kit is an entire book of infographics and instruction to go along so that you can reference it in the shop while you're building this bow. This book is packed with fantastic information so that you can build the best bow possible. I'm very excited about this entire project. We've been working on this for a really long time, and it's honestly probably the best thing Shatterproof Archery has ever put out. So I'm super pumped about it. Okay, let's jump into the bow layout right now. I put a lot of effort into minimizing the amount of tools you need for this bow build, but you'll definitely need a belt sander and an orbital sander. But I show you a variety of different ways to build this bow in this video. So what I decided to do is put a tool list together with direct links to everything I use, so that if it's a specialized tool or a specific tool, or you want to know what rasp or file or what sander I'm using, you can check it out in the description or hit that QR code. Today I'm going to use the minimal amount of tools and basic tools to show you how I would do it as if I were in my garage. I know I've got more tools around, but I'm going to stick to the basics because most of you aren't running an archery company who needs these tools for other purposes. So for this video, I'm going to try to simplify it and make this accessible to as many people as possible. For the layout, we've included 3 tools. One is just a string line. If you've got a different string you want to use, you can. We have a straight edge that's flexible, which will come nice and handy in a second. And then we included the silver Sharpie because it marks the fiberglass really well. The first thing we want to do is measure the width of the tip of the limb and mark the center. And we're going to do that on both sides. The reason is we're going to do all of our layout off of the center of the bow, and that's going to make it more consistent. So I'll grab my tape measure. I've got 1 3/4 inch, so 7/8 of an inch will be the middle or the center of the limb width-wise. I'll come over to this side, and this one is a little bit less than 1 3/4, so it's going to be 7/8 minus. Now that we got the middle of the width of the limbs marked on either side, we're going to measure 19 inches down the limb. The fiberglass we've included is 19 inches, so you don't even have to use a tape measure for this. I would recommend you grab some spring clamps, clamp it down, and then just write a line right at the end of the fiberglass, and that is going to be your 19-inch mark. Do that on both limbs. The nice thing about this is this fiberglass is going to curve easier than a tape measure, so you'll get that 19-inch mark consistent on both sides. We'll grab our pink line or any string you have, and I'll clamp that on that Sharpie mark. One of the big benefits here to laying it out from the center is this is how you can avoid limb twist on a fiberglass bow. You want to make sure that your pink line is directly in the middle of the tips, and then from there we're going to push it down and make a mark where the pink line and our 19-inch silver line intersect on the limb. I'll show you an example of what you don't want to do. If you just push this pink line down and be like, okay, we're good to go there, you can see by sighting down that that's not straight between the 2 limb tips. So you can re-pull this tight and look down the limb tips, and I see it straight, and from this angle you can push it down straight in the middle, and then from there mark your T. With the bones, we do a continuous taper, which is nice for layout because we just need to mark the width at our 19-inch mark and mark the width at the limb tips, and we're going to do that off of the center. You're going to mark 3/8 of an inch so that you'll end up with a total of a 3/4 inch limb width. You see, 3/8 of an inch. Come over here to do 3/8. And then let's double check, 3/4, that's perfect. At the 19-inch mark and the fade out, we want 3/4 of an inch on either side. If you measure from the 1-inch mark, it's easier than using the little metal piece. So come from the center to 3/4. And then on this one, come 3/4 down this way. And then this total width should be 1.5 inches. Sometimes the temptation with a straight edge is to put it here on the outside to mark it. That's a little harder to do. You can overlay it all the way across. That's gonna make it much easier. So I'm gonna lay it all the way across, go there, and up here to my mark. Now we've got the continuous taper we talked about, and you can perfectly mark it with this bending straight edge to get the exact taper of the limb you need. Now, I'm just gonna move it over the other way to the other side and clamp it on both sides. Check that out. Go ahead and nicely mark that. You do wanna make sure you get this as accurate as you can. And now you've got the perfect taper marked off the center line. And the cool thing with this style of bow, the top limb and the bottom limb are laid out the same way. So you can repeat what you did on the first limb onto the second limb. We've machined in some references for you here. This line right here is going to be the center of the bow, and the references are the same on both sides. So the exact same kit bow, you could build a left-handed or a right-handed bow. So we've got the very center of the bow lengthwise, meaning if you measure from the top limb and the bottom limb, this is the middle or center of the bow. And then this right here is going to be the arrow rest. And then you'll see it's the arrow rest by its being curved. So the center lies below the arrow rest. Right now, we want to mark the center across to this center on the top here, so we can use it as a reference later, because we'll be taking out this material. I'm just going to use a square and square that across. Next, we're going to cut in the arrow shelf. Now, depending on if you're right or left-handed will depend on what side you cut in the shelf on. If you're a right-handed archer, you're going to cut the shelf in on the left side of the bow. If you're a left-handed archer, you're gonna cut the shelf in on the right side of the bow. I'm making a right-handed bow today, so I'm gonna make sure I cut it in on the left side of the bow. Double, triple, maybe check this one 10 times, because I once cut an arrow shelf in on the wrong side and it's just not a happy day. You'll see our curved line. We're gonna use that as a reference. I'm gonna do 2 cuts, this direction, and then I'll do one this direction. The reason we have this round over is so that the arrow has less friction with the shelf when the shelf is finished being built. The main purpose of cutting in the arrow shelf now is to transfer this line down deeper so that when we remove the material, we have a good reference. So we're gonna go in 5/8 of an inch. So I will mark down here on both sides 5/8 of an inch, and then I'll make my hacksaw lines down to that measurement. I prefer to use a hacksaw to cut in because the hacksaw does really good going through the fiberglass and through the wood. When you're cutting, you want to go into the center of the bow. You don't want to be cutting this direction to where you could splinter out some of the fiberglass. So cut towards the middle of the bow and you'll have better results. You can use just a hacksaw blade like this, and I'll show you, by holding it with your hand. It'll take a little longer and you can go ahead and get all the way through and all the way down to where you need to be. If you have an actual hacksaw, it's nice. It'll be a little bit more sturdy, but either way, you can make it work. So you'll see here how I angled down the side with the fiberglass, and this is coming up in the middle. That's totally fine. We're gonna round this over with a rasp or a file and fix it up later. So I'll go ahead and come to this side to establish the curvature of that shelf. And now I'm down to the 5/8 of an inch. We'll finish that off later, but right now, this is part of the layout. Now we've got our shelf, and now we've got the deepest part of the handle. So what we've done is machined in these little 4 holes. The distance between the bottom of those machined holes is 1.5 inches, which is equal to the width up here at the limb. So what that means is we need to bring down the handle and the limbs all the way down to their finished width. So we'll start on the limbs and we'll bring it down to our Sharpie line. And then we'll move to the handle after the limbs and bring it down to the bottom of these pockets, or machine out all this, because this right here is our finished width as well. So we just got to take the pockets out on both sides after we do the limbs, and then we'll be ready to start shaping. One thing to keep in mind is a Sharpie line can be a little bit wide. So you need to know if you're bringing down your width to the Sharpie line or if you're taking away your Sharpie line. So what you can do is grab your tape measure and figure that out by measuring, okay, I've got the inside of my Sharpie lines is 3/4 of an inch. So I know I need to take away my Sharpie lines. But double check on how you laid out to know if you need to take away the Sharpie line or leave the Sharpie line so that you have 3/4 at the end of the limb and that you have 1.5 inches at the base. The first thing is to reduce the limb width. Now this tool right here, if you need to purchase a tool for this project, I would recommend this tool if you're trying to stay on the best budget possible, because this tool gives you the belt sander, but you're also going to get the oscillating spindle sander, which is great for shaping the handle. But there's so many ways to reduce the width, so I'm going to cover them all really quickly. First is a belt sander. It can be done on a small belt sander, but the larger the belt sander, the better. So the optimal scenario would be have a big, like 89-inch belt sander like this, where the entire limb can touch at the same time. But you don't have to have this. I'm gonna build it on a smaller one. I've got this belt sander right here I picked up on Marketplace a couple years ago, and it would be a great one as well because it's a little bit longer. I can fit most of the limb on it, but you still don't have to have this. You can still go smaller. So this belt sander here is just over 10 inches, and this is the one I'm gonna build out at least part of the limb on. I'm gonna show you a couple different methods here so that you can do the one that's best for you. When you're using the belt sander, you want to push in the middle of the sander. So you can see my hand right here is gonna do great. If I have my hands on the end, I'm gonna gouge in. But if I can hold my fingers right here in the middle, then I can keep it flat as it goes and sand down to my line or through my line, whatever's needed. But as you move the bow, make sure you keep even pressure in the middle. That's the most important thing. And even pressure is important even for these bigger, larger belt sanders, because without even pressure, you'll gouge. And on the bigger ones, it's gonna possibly gouge quicker. As far as grit goes, go as low as you can. Just do even pressure and slow pressure and you'll be great. Here's another option for those who have tools and want to speed up the process. You can use a bandsaw. Just make sure you have a carbide blade on there, and then what I would recommend is how we laid it out on the belly. Do that exact same layout, but do it on the back. And now it's on the back of the bow. I can go ahead and push this through and just cut out the excess material, then go to the belt sander and clean it up. The other option that surprised me that works out pretty good is actually using a table saw. And again, I would transfer it to the back, and then you can freehand the table saw. Be very careful with this method, wear all the protection you need, but it's a very fast way to reduce the limbs. Just remember, the faster the way to reduce the limbs, the greater chance of messing up, so do it at your own risk. One last point, try to follow the lines as precise as possible. If you can have it 1.5 here, continuous taper down to 3/4 here, the bow's gonna shoot fantastic. We've tested this so many times and we've got this figured out, so it's gonna shoot great. So follow those rules as best as possible for best results. I'm gonna do a couple different methods for each side to show you times. So this first one, I've got worst case scenario, 80 grit sandpaper, 10-inch belt. Let's see how long it takes to get one of these sides down to the line. You'll absolutely wanna wear a mask when using the fiberglass. Sometimes you'll see me not wear it in videos, and that's sometimes because I'm reenacting something to get a better angle. But when you're actually building, definitely wear a mask. And then I like gloves because fiberglass is itchy and sticky, so it's nice to have the proper protective gear. Zach in the other shop he wears a jacket every single time he sands fiberglass, just to protect his arms as well, which is a good idea. For dust collection, I'm just using my shop vac, and that tends to work really well with this tool. So it's not too bad. It took me 3 minutes to do one side, so it'd be 12 minutes, worst case scenario. Take a little more time, maybe. I've done a lot of them, but it doesn't take too long to shape the limb, so that's really cool. I transferred my lines from the belly to the back of the bow, so I can show you how to do it on the table saw. You're gonna freehand it and run it through. Now, hand to saw awareness is extremely important. The nice thing here is you can keep your hands well away from the blade, so it should be safe. But if you don't feel comfortable doing something like this, don't do it. First, I like to anchor my left hand on the front of the table saw as far away from the blade as I can be, and I will keep my hand there the entire time while pushing only with the right hand through. The left hand's the guide, the right hand's the pusher, and this gives you 10 inches away from the blade and helps you be very safe. Just make sure you wear safety goggles and a dust mask. The bandsaw method is the exact same as the table saw method, except probably a little bit safer. But you're only saving about 2 minutes doing that compared to this belt sander. And if you've got a 48 or a larger inch belt sander, I would probably just stick to that the whole time. I just wanted to give options and show you some different ways to do it. And the side that I did with the belt sander is super smooth. The side with the table saw is not smooth yet, so I need to clean it up on the belt sander now. So if you do a cutting method, give yourself a little bit of room to sand down to make your line a perfect taper. Okay, now our limbs are nicely tapered, and you'll notice that it's kind of gouging in, and that's because we haven't reduced the width on our handle yet. So we're just going to reduce the width on our handle to 1.5 inches, which is basically putting this on the belt sander until you get to the bottom of these 4 pockets. And that's going to make it flow into your limb perfectly. Really easy step, but just be careful not to gouge into the belt sander. Even pressure in the middle, same rules as the limbs, and you'll be good to go. We've removed most of the material, and you'll see I'm almost to the bottom of these pockets. We're almost to the shaping part, and it's gonna be super fun. So we're gonna get into the art right now. So far we've been doing measurements, but it's gonna get really cool really soon. So let's finish this out. All right, that concludes all of the shaping, or the reducing of material. Rather, now it's time to go to shaping. We're gonna shape the tip overlays next, and then we'll move on to shaping the handle. If you use a low grit sandpaper on the belt sander, you might get these little fluffs, these little strands coming off the glass. And so before I do move on to tip overlays, I like to take some hand sandpaper, and I'm just gonna round these over real lightly, real easily, and real quickly, but that'll keep a splinter from running vertically down the bow. Fiberglass come in these very straight strands, and so if a strand were to catch at the tip, it could run towards the middle of the limb, and you wouldn't want that to happen. So I like to do this for extra precaution. It's really that quick, you don't have to do much. Just rounding it over to make sure no fiberglass strands split out. We're gonna start with layout on the tip overlays. I'm gonna use a little bit of acetone to take off these old Sharpie marks from the previous layout. That way I have a fresh slate for new marks. First, we'll measure 1/2 inch down from the tip of the bow. I'm gonna do a dot on each side, and then I'll be able to match my dots up to make a straight line. Now, flip the bow over to the belly, clean it up. From the tip on the belly of the bow, we'll measure 1.5 inches down. draw that line across. Now we can flip the bow to the side. We're going to connect those lines to establish where the string groove will go. And do the same on the other side. Next, I'm going to use a chainsaw file or a rat tail file, and you're just going to follow this Sharpie line and cut it in the depth of the file. And you'll do this on both sides of the limb. So I'll show you here, it doesn't take too long. Go nice and controlled. Start slow like that to establish that groove really well. Then you can pick it up if you want to. You could also use a Dremel tool, but that gets a whole lot more dangerous. So for this project, I'd recommend to do this part by hand. How we'll know we're down to depth is when this is smooth right over the top of the file, because our file is the depth that we want to go. Continue filing down. Now it's smooth, so we can flip to the other side. Something to keep in mind is where you're filing in relation to the Sharpie line. Like we did on the layout, you want to know if you're filing on the middle of the Sharpie line, the left side, or the right side. With this layout on the tip overlays, I like to file the Sharpie line away. So I'm going to file right in the middle of it, and that'll make sure it's the same on both sides. When you're starting the line as well, you can tilt it in one direction or the other. That'll make it easy to start on the right path. So I'll start here on the back, hold it steady. Now I'm starting to establish that groove, and then from there I'm going to ease the front side down. And now I'm flat, and you'll see how I've kept it along that Sharpie line the whole time. Now the groove's established, and we can get to work. With both sides of the bow filed in, we want to connect those two sides on the back of the bow. We've got triple stack of fiberglass on the back for you, so we don't want to file all the way through that fiberglass. We want the bowstring to lay in the fiberglass, and that'll make this bow invincible, basically. A quick bigger picture with bowstrings and string grooves. We want the bowstring to have even pressure all along the loop on the string groove. We don't want one part of the string groove to have more pressure than the other, because it'll wear out in that location. Most bowstrings wear out in the string grooves first, so we want to make this as smooth as we possibly can and as evenly rounded on both sides as we can. That'll help your bowstrings last longer. So as you're filing in on the back of the bow, don't go the full 1/8 of the inch down. You actually don't have to go down at all. You just have to round those corners. If you'd like to go down a little bit, you totally could go a 1/16. Just don't go through all the fiberglass. If I were to put a bowstring on this tip overlay right now and shoot it, it would slide into the string grooves, and you actually could shoot this, but you'll see right here on the corner, since we have a corner, it's going to end up cutting right here in the corner eventually. So we want to smooth it so smooth that there's not one spot that it cuts, but so that it wears evenly overall. As you're filing both sides down, if you bend down on the end, you can look down those string grooves and to see which side you need to take more material off of. So right here I can see, okay, I took more off the left than the right, so I'll come back over here to the right and continue removing it. But getting the right perspective really helps you know where you need to remove material. One of my favorite tools to use for this, to finish it off, is one of these rolls of sandpaper. It's real nice because you can rip a nice little strip out, and then you can use this to saw it basically back and forth with really high grit to make it super smooth. The cool thing is that this tip overlay right now will hold a string and shoot an arrow. So now it's time to make it look pretty and also fine tune it to make it shoot as good as possible. This is how I like to finish out my tip overlays. First, I like to remove all of this material back here. What that will help with is when you draw the bowstring back and it pulls this way, it won't catch right there. It will allow the bowstring to freely pull backwards. To cut out the excess material, use a file or a fine-toothed rasp. The exact shape of this is up to you, but now the bowstring will flow freely back when you draw it back. Repeat on the other side. Next, we'll flip the bow to the belly, and we're going to make sure that both of our grooves match up on both sides. So I'm going to bring them in just a little bit more on both sides and make it look symmetrical and the same from this angle as well. With a bowstring, we have a loop and then it connects to one string at the bottom. So where that connects, it's going to be pulling together. So you'll see the angle of the bowstring wants to pull together here, and that's why on both sides we need to bring it in a little bit more so the bowstring can go in its natural angle. Otherwise, if we left it here, it would rub a little extra here and here. And remember, we don't want it to rub extra in any location. I'm going to go back to my fine rasp and keep these sides symmetrical as well. Again, you can do what looks good here, trying to give you the principles, and then you can kind of have fun and be artistic with a lot of this. That comes together much freer. Now this is a really functional tempo overlay, but I gotta admit, it's very clunky. So we're gonna make this look a whole lot better. What I'm gonna do is kind of create a little bit of a V on the back and remove this material. And I'm also going to remove material to make this fade into the fiberglass very seamlessly. I'm going to do most of that over on that small belt sander, and I'm going to switch out the belt for a 1-inch spindle sander to do this profile here. I'll show you all of that, but you have complete liberty to do whatever you want on this. The main things to keep in mind is don't cut into the back of the bow when you're fading in this section. The second thing is try not to make it too thin so that you have enough beef there to hold the string strong. But we've already got the groove completely done, so it would shoot great, but now let's make it pretty. A good tool to use here is an orbital sander, just to round everything over and clean it up, and then I'll finish by hand sanding. We now have a finished tip overlay. All we have left to do on it is final sanding. I like to do final sanding of the handle and the tip overlays at the same time. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to shaping the other tip overlay, and then we'll move on to the handle. The first thing we're gonna do is cut in the sight window. We'll reference our arrow shelf that we cut in during layout. The things to keep in mind on the sight window is to not cut past center of the bow, but you can definitely cut to center. That's where I like to end it. The second thing is don't go above 5 inches on the sight window. If you go above 5 inches, you'll start to get into the working part of the limb, and we don't want to mess with that. There are plenty of different methods you could use to remove the wood on the sight window. Up here at 5 inches, I like to use a sander to give it a nice radius, and then I'll either use a chisel or a rasp or more sanders to take out the excess material. To establish my angle on the sight window, first I'll mark 3/4 of an inch in, which will be halfway between the handle at the arrow rest. Then I'll move up to the top of the sight window at the 5-inch mark and mark an inch over. This will be a slightly slanted sight window, but it'll give it a really good picture. Here I am just finishing my cut down to the exact mark I want for the arrow rest, and I am continuing to keep the angle so that the arrow shelf is convexed. A chisel works good here to remove that excess material. Just go really soft, that way you don't split into the actual arrow rest. Just take your time on this if you're going to use a chisel. Otherwise, the safest method would be to use a rasp. With the riser handle, we've laminated 3 pieces of wood together to provide extra strength. So you'll see I just made it through one of the laminations here, and when you get to that point, that's when you really want to slow down and take your time, because you're getting really close to the center of the bow. Once you visually break through that glue line, now you know you're getting really close to your finished depth. All right, so this is what it should look like when it's done. Now I convexed this side and I convexed the arrow rest this direction. That's gonna help there be as minimal friction as possible when shooting the arrow. That's an optional step, but if you want to, just sand a little extra on this side, sand a little extra on the back side, and leave the middle pushing out the furthest, and then you can convex the arrow rest as well. And we kind of established that convex earlier with the hacksaw. The other thing we've done is with the measurements, at a normal cant, this angle is pretty much vertical, and that tends to give you a nice sight window. So that's why we have that slightly angled. You can, if you want to, make it go straight up. If you want to give yourself a little bit more room to see, you could have it out more. You can do it how you want, but that's why I do it this way. With the sight window now completed, we're going to find the deepest part of the handle and mark where that's gonna be. And if you have larger hands, it may be a little bit further out, and if you have smaller hands, it may be a little closer in, but this is for the average person. And remember, we have this little reference line right here that we created from our machine marks earlier. So we wanna transfer this line over to the side of the bow. We'll measure from the back of the bow because that's going to be a consistent reference. We'll come in 1.5 inches, and that's going to be the deepest part of the throat of the handle. Now, you can also mark the 2-inch mark right here if you want to drill out this area with a bit. If you want to remove the material by drilling, there's a couple things I recommend. One, you'll need some sort of drill press. If you try to do it with a hand drill, it's not gonna work good for you. And with the drill press, you'll want to clamp the bow down to the table so it doesn't move at all. And then with the 1-inch Forstner bit, you can go ahead and drill out that excess material. The reason you wanna clamp it down is because that bit's gonna jump around on you quite a bit. I've done that before, but today I'm just gonna use the sander. So I'm gonna make a nice even arc here just as a guideline to look at while I'm sanding it out. And I'm gonna do that on the front and on the back side. I'm just creating a general reference here so I know where to sand out the material. If you don't have a drill press, we can go ahead and start sanding here. But if you've got a hand drill like this guy, what you can do is just put one hole right above your 1.5 inch mark. And then when you're on the sander, you'll be able to hit that hole and know that you're at the depth you want to be. The main reason I like to drill a hole like that is in case I sand off the marks I make, which I'm going to do, then now I have a hard reference to know. I would take this part really slow, really carefully. If you use a Forstner bit, be very careful, because One of the easiest mistakes to make is to make the throat of this handle too little. So work it down incrementally if you need to find what's comfortable for your hand. Because remember that the goal is that it feels good in your hand when you're shooting it, not when you're just holding it in your hand like a screwdriver. So that's the end goal. So we want to get it really close to our finished dimensions. We want to go ahead and shoot it, which we'll do later, and then we can fine tune it down. It's really hard to fine tune and add material. You can always fine tune and remove material. So first we'll go over to the sander and we'll start making this profile, and we'll just start shaping the entire handle. And as we go, I'll give you guys tips of how I'm doing it. Again, do this however you want, but I'll show you really good up close shots of the shape I like and the finished product. This is the coolest part, is that you get to make this your own. Here's the finished bow, and here is the one we're working on now. I just wanted to show you a quick comparison of the curves that we're going to be going for and how much material we still have to remove. This is getting really exciting because today we're going to shoot this bow. Started a lot of that rough shaping now. I want to give a couple principles or a couple tips of what I'm going to do and look for, and I'm going to try to mark them out so that if this is your first time, it'll make sense for you. So the first thing is I like a nice good round top of the arrow shelf. So I will curve this like that and curve this side like that. And so all of this material on both sides, we will be taking out all of that. We got our handle down to the deepest part of the throat with a 1-inch spindle sander. So we don't want a boxy handle. And right now it's pretty boxy. We went in this way, we've gone in this way. What we want is kind of a round handle as much as we can, or an oval handle as much as we can to fit good in our hands. So we'll be taking out material from here to the center and taking out kind of these corners. That way it shapes well with our hand. Kind of the same way we did back here. We took out those corners. Down here on the bottom, I wanted some hard transitions. You can see how it's nice and pretty and flat, and then transitions into that nice round over. This is 5 inches below the arrow shelf. So you can measure 5 inches below the arrow shelf and boom, right there. You actually could go 6 1/4 if you wanted. So you could go all the way down to there before you're going to start to get into the fade out. I'm grabbing this finish handle for reference so that you can kind of see where we're going, but check out the back. So you'll see how thin the finished handle is versus how thick and bulky the handle is we're working on now. And it kind of has this hourglass shape that I really like, and that is very smooth and comfortable. On the finished handle, it's really comfortable here, but when you grab it, you'll see this side's cut in here for this finger, and I really like that on the back side. And then the other thing I really like to reduce a lot is right here where your thumb goes, this palm meaty section, to have it removed. So you'll look directly at the handle and see how there's more taken off where your thumb goes than there is the other side. And that's just for that extra comfort. These are a couple things I'm thinking about as I shape the handle. What I definitely will recommend that you do is as you get closer to your finished handle, you grab it and hold it. Don't squeeze it real hard like this, but grab it, pretend you're shooting it and see how it feels as if you were shooting it, and then remove the material that you need to so that it'll fit good for your hand. Take this slow and easy and you'll have a handle you love. All right, so we are at least, I'd say 80% of the way there, maybe 85. And I'm gonna stop there and move on to the tillering so that we can shoot the bow. And after we shoot it, then we can make the final last 10 to 15% tweaks that we need. And when we make those tweaks, we'll do our final sanding on the tip overlays. But for now, let's move on to the tiller. The first thing we need to do is clean up the bow. On the sides of the bow where the bamboo and fiberglass come together, sand that. The goal here is to remove all the tool marks and to slightly round over the fiberglass corners. After that, we can move to the belly and the back of the bow. Sand out any glue on the fiberglass and then just scratch up the whole surface of the fiberglass lightly. We're not trying to take a lot off the fiberglass, hardly any really. We're just taking off the glue and then lightly scuffing everything up on both sides. Now the bow is prepped to tiller. Tillering a fiberglass bow is a lot different than tillering a self bow. But if you've done a self bow before, I guarantee this will probably be quite a bit easier than the self bow. The reason is in the glue up, what we've done for you is add tapered laminations, and we've used all the measurements, so this should come out very close to a perfect shooting bow. So the tillering today is going to be very minor. With a fiberglass bow like this, you could use a tillering string, but if you have a string that's the right size, you can go ahead and use that as well. There's a couple different methods to string it. You could use a bowstringer, or my favorite method because of speed, so I'm going to wrap that around my right leg. I'm going to put my thigh in the middle of the handle, and then I'm going to bend it evenly on both sides, and that is a nice, easy way to string it. The tip to that is to not stick the tip overlay on the ground. If you do that, the tip overlay can break, so keep this side off the ground. Check everything's in the grooves, and goodness gracious, look how good that looks right off the bat. We're already good to go back to full draw. What we're going for is a positive tiller by 1/4 inch. What that means is this top measurement needs to be 1/4 inch greater than this bottom measurement. And right now on the bottom, we're at 7 1/4, and on the top, we're at 7 1/4. So we need to adjust this top limb so that it bends 1/4 inch more than the bottom limb. When you put the string on the bow, it may or may not be perfect, but you'll be within 1/2 inch of where you need to go. The factors that could change it being perfect is the glue up, and then also how the taper is, how the measurements are. Because we're also using natural material like bamboo, every piece of bamboo is not the same, even if it's the same thickness. So the poundage could be slightly off, and the tiller could be slightly off, but that's fixable, and it's quite easy to fix. If you have a negative tiller that's excessive or a positive tiller that's excessive, the first thing to check is your limb width. And check it in 3 different locations. Measure down 10 inches, check it there. Measure down 19 inches, check it there. Check it at the tip. And if you do that on both limbs, see if any limb is wider than the other. Your negative or your positive tiller could be excessive because your limb width from your top to your bottom limb are not consistent. What we've done with this bow is put 50 thousandths fiberglass on it. And the most common ranges for fiberglass is going to be 30 thousandths, 40 thousandths, and 50 thousandths. The reason we did 50,000 for this kit bow is so we have 20 thousandths of fiberglass on each side for tillering. So don't be scared that you're going to remove too much fiberglass getting it into the correct tiller. You're going to be fine, and it's going to be a great shooting bow for you. To create more of a positive tiller, we're going to remove fiberglass on this side. We're going to use the orbital sander with that 120 grit sandpaper. There's 2 methods you can do to make sure you're consistent. The first method is to count strokes. So you can do full strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4. I recommend doing 15 strokes on the belly and the back of the bow before checking tiller again. The other method, which I prefer, is to grab a Sharpie and cover the entire limb of the fiberglass with the Sharpie, and that Sharpie is going to be your reference. So all I need to do is sand off this Sharpie line. And once the Sharpie is sanded off, I know I removed material consistently. And that's the key, because the bend's gonna be good as long as we can remove material consistently. I recommend every time you start to tiller, get a new piece of sandpaper, and that will help you have consistent results each time. Really does not take long. I don't have gloves on right now, but this dust, fine, and it would be smart to have gloves on. Also wear a dust mask for this section. Okay, let's wipe that down and let's restring the bow. Like a self bow, we'll want to exercise the limbs. To exercise the bow limbs, pull the bow back 20 times on a tillering tree or by hand. And with a fiberglass bow, you can hold it at full draw for 5 to 10 seconds because the material is so strong. And with this bow, I'm gonna tiller the full thing without a tillering tree. And I'll use that later to test out the poundage, but I'm gonna show you, you can do this without a tillering tree or tillering stick or anything like that. So you wanna exercise it probably 30 times to full draw. You can even hold it if you want to. This bow feels a little heavy, around 50 pounds. For this step, we're looking to get inside of our acceptable tiller range. And then we're gonna shoot the bow. And we're gonna tiller off of how it feels when you shoot. Some bow might feel a little better with more or less positive tiller, and that can be due to how you shoot the bow. How big your fingers are. Do you shoot split finger? Do you shoot 3-under? Do you string walk a little bit? Like, where are your hands on the bow? And that can change the tiller slightly. So when you're making your own bow, it's so awesome to be able to customize it perfectly to you so you can shoot the bow, and if you don't like how it feels, you can just adjust the tiller slightly until you love it. When measuring tiller, I measure to the inside of the bowstring. If you measure one to the middle of the string or to the outside or to the inside, the bowstring has thickness to it, so you need to pay attention to that to make sure you're consistent. 5/16. An 1/8 plus, so perfect. If I did my math right, we're 3/16 positive tiller right now, so I'm gonna leave that right there. All right, let's send an arrow down range. Now that we've already exercised the limbs, we know our arms are warm, so we're good to shoot. Guys, this bow is already shooting so good. So this bow is dead on the first time, which is great. If your bow doesn't feel the way you like it to, just keep changing it until you do like it. The other thing that may not be on is the poundage. So let's check that now. All right, I've moved over to the warehouse now, just so that I can test out the poundage here on our crane scale. But you don't have to have that. You can test it with one of those poundages where you can just draw back. Let's see where we're at 28 inches. So we're 52 at 28. Now I got a little longer draw length, so let's see what we're looking at like just over 29. So 56.22. For me, a 56-pound bow is just a little bit heavy. With this bare bones kit bow, we did a 5-pound range for you. And that is because with the 50 thousandths glass and with limb thickness, we can actually adjust the poundage. I'll say 7 pounds, although you could push it a little bit more, but I just won't recommend that. Let's just say this. I know another bow company that makes custom bows where he's pushed it to 20 pounds with this thickness of fiberglass. I don't recommend that though. I really don't. We have a great shooting bow, but our poundage isn't where we want it. So to reduce the poundage, we've got a couple of options. One is the limb width, and 2 is the limb thickness. And we've got room to adjust both. That's why we built this the way it is, so that you guys can customize it. We've got these 5-pound ranges, and we glue the bow up so that you'll hit the upper end of your 5-pound range and then be able to bring it down to where you want it. So I can actually reduce the width of my bow. What we have found to be an acceptable range on the limb tip width with a continuous taper is from that 3/4 inch down to 1/2 of an inch. The way the bow shoots will not change. The poundage will just change if you're adjusting that taper. But you have the freedom to take this down to 1/2 an inch and do a continuous taper with leaving the 19-inch mark at 1.5 inches. If you do that on the upper and the lower limb, you will drop 2.5 pounds on the bow. And that's a rough number. Reducing the width, it's not linear, so you will see maybe a 2 to 3 pound drop depending on where you're at on the spectrum. The second method to reducing bow poundage, the Sharpie method. Now our tiller's good, remember that, so we just want to remove material evenly. Use the Sharpie on the belly and the back of the upper and the lower limbs, and then remove the material with a fresh piece of sandpaper. Exercise the limbs, test the poundage again, and repeat. I have found that with the Sharpie method, the average tends to come out to 1 pound. So I'm not done with my bow yet. Since I have a longer draw length, mine was closer to 56 pounds, I believe, if I remember right, instead of that 50-pound mark I want to end at. I'm actually going to reduce the limb width because I'm good with a little thinner limbs. And then the second thing I'm going to do is remove material, belly back, Sharpie method, until we get the bow we want. If you do adjust your limb width significantly, you'll need to re-clean up your tip overlays. All that means is grabbing that chainsaw file and making the side grooves a little bit deeper so the string sits in there flushly. I will check my tiller, make sure I'm good still. Got a 1/4 inch positive tiller, so I'll shoot it in a bit to make sure everything checks out. Let's check the poundage, see if we're close to that 50 mark for me. $51, I'm gonna leave it there since I want finished at 50 and final sanding and shooting it for the first 500 shots. I'll probably lose that initial pound. So that's going to be good on the tiller for me if it shoots and checks out. At this point, I'm within a pound of where I want to be. I've got a 1/4 inch positive tiller, so I'll shoot this and see if it's shooting well. If it is shooting well, we're done. If it's not shooting well, I could adjust my tiller by taking off material off of just one limb. So I've taken off the bottom. It'll be less of a positive tiller. If I take it off the top, it'd be more of a positive tiller. I've still got room to toy with that if I need to, if this doesn't shoot well. You gotta check that out. This literally means nothing, but when you shoot like your first shot and you get like inside the bullseye with a new bow, it makes you think it's even a better tiller just cause. But I have done enough of these that I kind of had an idea of what arrow would shoot straight, and that shot great. Let's try it again. All right, we're looking really good. We have now got a perfectly functioning bow, but we're not done yet because now it's time to add a little bit of sauce, a little bit of spice, and make it look as good as you want it to or leave it as bad as you want it to. So we're gonna do final sanding, final touch-ups, and then put the finish on. With effectively the exact same bow, we can have different designs. Like in the arrow shelf, we can make that more sharp or less sharp by using the spindle sander. The same thing down here where the bamboo fades into the riser. So you can do all these customized looks based on how you want. When you're shooting it, your hand is right there, which means you've got all this section to customize and all this to customize. So you could cut in the fiberglass a little bit more up top on the non-working part. My point is, you can make this your own. For final sanding, I'm gonna move from that 100 grit sandpaper range up to 220 to go over the fiberglass, to go over the walnut, to go over everything nice and lightly just to get the scratches out from the 120 grit sandpaper. Then from there, I'm gonna take my good old roll of sandpaper here and really clean up the tip overlays. There's also a way to kind of use this burnishing tool with the Dremel tool if you want to, so I'll show you that as well. But the goal in final sanding is to make it look as good as you want it and to take all the scratch marks out. The other thing I forgot to say is that as you're shooting the bow, once the tiller feels good at shooting great, think about the handle while you're shooting it a couple times. Make sure all those curves are how you like it before you start the final sanding. It's the weekend, so I'm hijacking our production setup real quick to show you a couple tools that are useful. If you've got them, they're definitely not necessary for one bow, but one tool specifically I really enjoy using. So got this Dremel tool right here with this burnishing wheel, and I'll have you come in tight here on the tip overlay, and I'll show you how awesome this works on this tip overlay. You want it low enough it doesn't burn, but using this to clean up an area can save you a lot of time. So after your 220, if you want to use this burnishing tool on the sides or in here or on the arrow shelf, I find that to be really useful. If you don't have the burnishing tool, again, just use the roll of hand sandpaper and it'll just take you twice the time, which is like 4 minutes instead of 2. So. But when you do it every day a lot, it's nice to have these tools. That's the other really good method, is grab some higher grit sandpaper on one of these files to really smooth out those corners of the grooves. Final sanding's complete. Taking some acetone here to clean it up for finishing. Now, finishing is not my strong suit. And actually, before finishing, we can write on the bow. If you want to write your poundage, your signature, whatever information you want on this bow, you can write it on there. I personally think writing on a bow is definitely way more difficult than actually building the bow itself. If you've got severe dysgraphia clinically, you know what I'm talking about. A paint marker works out really good. Also, India ink. Is that what we've been using? Yeah. Some white India ink with a fountain pen also works great. And you can write on the bow whatever you would like on there. It will be a lot easier for you to write on the fiberglass than on the wood. Even though the wood's really smooth after final sanding, there's still going to be some grain in this wood that you're going to feel when you're writing. Whereas if you write on the fiberglass, it will be smoother. But you can do whatever you want with it. I've done both.
You can even paint the bow.
You could paint the bow. The other thing I've done is I've burned in on the side of the bow what I want, which is kind of what I like to do. Should I do that today? The other cool thing about making your own, well, is that it can be your own. Because the industry standard is what poundage at 28 inches, that can be annoying for someone who doesn't have a 28-inch draw. So if you have a 25 or 27, or like me, like 29 and a quarter, 29 and a half, it can get confusing for us. So with my own bow, I can mark it at whatever poundage it is at 29 and a quarter inches, which is pretty cool. And I don't have to try to do the math and guess the extra poundage. So check it out. A 28-inch bow is 46 pounds. 29-inch bow is 51 pounds. So we're talking 5-pound difference, a 4 to 5 pound difference, and 1 inch of draw on the last inch of your draw. So here I can actually mark it as my 50-pound bow or 51-pound bow at 29 inches. This is our spray booth behind me. This is what we use for our custom bows. The process we use in the spray booth is not what I'm going to do for this bow, but I want to give you a few different options so you can use what's best for you. So in here, we're going to use a shellac, and then we're going to use our HLVP sprayer to do this water-based finish right here. We'll do probably about 2 to 3 coats of the shellac and 3 to 4 of this. So we end up around 6 coats of finish for the custom bows. I don't know about you, but that's way too much work for me. So let's go do a different method. I'm joking. That's not too much work. It's just not what I would do in my garage. It's just what I would do for customers. What I do recommend, no matter what type of finish you use, is probably a matte finish if you don't want reflections. And I don't like reflections on my bow, especially if you're someone who goes and hunts with these bows. You don't want it to be real reflective. The other thing that's nice about a matte finish or a flatter finish is that it's going to hide dents and scratches better on the bow, which I really like. It's nice to make it look clean and professional for as long as possible without refinishing your bow. But since you've done this whole process, if you ever do need to refinish your bow, you know how to sand off the finish and put a new finish on. I primarily will recommend a spray polyurethane can with a matte finish, or kind of any spray clear coat can. But one of the best things about fiberglass bows is fiberglass is so protective. I built a bow a year and a half ago, my first version of the Bones torture test bow, actually 100-year-old log bow. If you guys have been here for a while, you've seen that video. I never put a finish on that bow, and I've left it strung for a year and a half. I've left it indoors and outdoors, and it is like the day I made it. I don't recommend that, but these bows, fiberglass is super tough, so that's a great benefit. So you have a ton of options on finishes, and the protection is probably less important than the look that you get. So I would pay attention to what kind of finish, what kind of look do you want? Because you can do a wipe-on finish, it'll look great, it'll protect enough, and you'll be good to go. Or if you want to get a really expensive sprayer and go all in, if you already do furniture or something, you can do that as well. So there's a big variability to it. For me and my self bows, I like to wipe on an oil finish that'll just seep in, or I like to just get a spray can and spray it. And today we'll spray it with a clear coat. We got a custom heat stamp for our Bones bow that was quite a bit too small, so we've never used it. So I'm gonna make good use of this $60.
I think it's 70.
$70. That's not bad. It'll work. Yeah, you can read that, can't you?
Yeah.
All right. That's my best one ever. All right. And now I'm just going to do my signature.
Boom.
All right. Just remember, if you're going to sign it or something, do that before you spray the finish, or else you'll have a fun time sanding off the finish or not signaturing it. I find it useful to get a spring clamp, and if you can have a location where you can clamp it, it's quite nice because you can spray the whole bow and then finish off with the tip overlays later. I'm going to use my clear coat, and the biggest mistake I see myself do is I get impatient and try to put too much on at a time. It's good to keep the recommended distance and to keep a nice even coat. It's better to go light than too heavy. And if you go light, you can always add more, but once you get a drip, it's a nightmare getting it out. So come in on this walnut and you'll see how this pale looking walnut comes to life with a clear coat. Oh yeah. It's a good recommendation to vent out the area and wear a mask. I forgot to because I was just so excited. You want to keep moving and let go of the trigger while you're moving. So if I spray in the open area, you don't want to stop and then let go of the trigger. You want to let go of the trigger and keep moving past it, and that'll keep from getting any drips. All right, we can do this for real now, baby. The can's going to be the cheapest way to go for sure. You can get really good results. Thin coats, generally 4 to 6 is going to be great. Look at the recoat time, follow the instructions, and you'll be good to go. The other thing you can do is shoot the bow for a week or so before you clear coat it, so you can have fun and don't have to wait 3 days. That's generally what I do. Here is my completed bare bones kit bow. Completely done. I'll show you a couple shots right here. But thanks so much for watching today, and if you built this yourself, congratulations, that's awesome. Please send me some photos and videos, and we'll have a little certification for you as an official bare bones builder. So please send that so we know you completed the bow. Also, if you just watched this for fun, I appreciate your time. I thank you for all the support. The goal is to make archery accessible and make bow making accessible to as many people as we can. And because of you guys, we're able to do this. So it means a ton, and it's such an honor to be able to serve you. With that, I'll see you on the next one. So as always, stay shatterproof.